Okay, guys, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the three properties. This is something we always do in the beginning of second semester to kind of introduce you to art appreciation, or the concept of how to look and think about what art is and what it means. So the first property is subject. This is simple. It's just what you see. It's what you can identify. You want to try to keep this as simple and straightforward as possible. So even though this is a lot of flowy, curvy lines, it's easy to identify this as a pig. And this is pretty easy to identify. This is a can of Coke and delicious fountain soda full of icy Coke. You could just say the subject is Coca-Cola. You know, if you want to be a little more specific, you could say a can of Coke and a fountain soda of Coke. Sometimes it's a little more difficult. Like, what is this? How do you identify this? Well, it's just geometric shapes. Geometric shapes and colors are the subject. You don't really identify anything but triangles, and there's things other than triangles. So shapes, maybe lines, but really it's identifying shapes. Composition is the second principle, second major property of art. So composition is how those subjects are arranged, how the elements of art are used. So where they're at and how they're created. And so like in this case, the subject is just like splotches of color. But then when you start talking about the elements, you can talk about how they're like flowing lines of splattered paint. It creates texture. You can talk about primary colors because the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. There's black and there's white. So you can talk about the shapes of organic shapes and stuff. So you talk about what elements are used. You can talk when it's very realistic, you can talk about the composition and how the painter is looking at his model who is centered and a focal point. You can talk about the muted colors. You don't have to talk about every single element every time. Like if you're working on painting, you're not going to talk about form because there are no three-dimensional shapes. But you could talk about how the realistic values and light modeling, shading create the look of three-dimensional forms. And finally, we have content. The content is the most interesting one. That's the longest one usually. It's where you're actually going to decide what the painting means, what it's about. And it's like each work of art has some kind of message. Even if it's just simple shapes, it has some kind of message, some kind of meaning. And there's a meaning that the artist has for it, and then there's the meaning that the individual comes up with it. You might know about the artist, you might know something about that person, and then you can get more meaning from that, or you might just have your own personal feelings about it when you look at something. So you can tell there's something, when you look at this painting by Frida Kahlo, you can tell there's just some strange things going on here. She's a Spanish artist, and if you know a little bit about her life, some of this will make more sense. I mean, we can identify the subject of a woman on a hospital gurney with wounds and bleeding, and then this woman's sitting here. If you're not familiar with this is a back brace that would keep somebody's back supported when their back was damaged. The sun, the moon, it could make you think maybe about, like light and darkness. I can't read Spanish, and I don't remember what the sign says she's holding, what her flag says, but I do know a little bit of the backstory. When she was young, she was hit by a bus and very, very badly injured. She almost couldn't walk. She had to spend the rest of her life wearing this back brace, and she suffered a lot from pain. And so this is a painting about her personal suffering, how she almost died, was badly injured, and then had to spend the rest of her life, dealing with this pain and suffering, and kind of like light and darkness, life and death. So the content is but really it's yours. If you don't know anything about the work, or sometimes even if you do, you still can create your own idea of what it means. If it doesn't mean anything to you, you have to try to maybe think about what the artist was trying to say. Just saying it means nothing is really not acceptable. You have to come up with something for content. So those are your three principles. And subject should be short, to the point, maybe just like one sentence. The subject of this painting is a pig. Composition, usually, you know, if you're if you're asked to write a couple sentences, you might talk about the two most important elements that you think are in the painting, the two most important compositional things, like where things are arranged, that's important. Um, and then content, you know, that's sort of up to you. You can write more when you're talking about content. If you don't get a lot from a painting, it might be shorter, but it's usually going to be the longest, you know, when you're trying to explain a work of art. And all art has these three properties, these three parts, these three aspects. Um, it's subject, composition, and content. All right, thanks.